Hello, and welcome to this presentation. This is an introduction to Agile, and I'm Julian. So we're going to start with why. Why Agile? So the idea here is really to improve the outcomes for your teams and for your stakeholders. A few years ago, I had a team that moved to Agile, and after about 6 months of that transition, I asked them for feedback because I wanted to know if it had worked. They told me four things. They said that they felt it added more structure, efficiency, and collaboration, that they had clearer goals, that they had more context, they were more engaged, and they understood their teams a lot better. So when we talk about Agile, we usually put it in context of waterfall. So waterfall and Agile are two different project management methods, and we're not going to say that one is better than the other. They're actually the right tool for the right needs, really. So the key difference here is that waterfall will follow a very well-established sequence whereby the requirements are then followed by the design, development, testing, deployment, and you have a big outcome at the end. Whereas Agile is more of a cyclical approach whereby all those steps are combined in 2 to 4 weeks of what we call a sprint, and you have a cumulative outcome at the end of each one of those sprints. So let's take waterfall as example A and Agile as example B. In the case where you're trying to build a car and you know exactly what the car looks like, it's probably better to take a waterfall approach because you're going to optimize your flow in order to get to that final car as fast as possible. Whereas if you actually don't know exactly what you want, but you know that you need a mean of transportation, then you're probably going to be looking at Agile, whereby at the end of sprint one, you're going to end up with a skateboard. And then you realize through feedback and inspect and adapt that you need a handle. So then you're going to get to step two. And then you probably want to be able to accelerate, and you're going to end up with a bicycle, step three, and so on and so forth. The beauty of Agile here is that you can start moving and using as early as step one and be able to collect feedback on how it's going. So waterfall is really more efficient when we know exactly what we're building. It's less subjective to change, and it's hard to deliver incrementally. So in our case here, we're taking a bridge. Chances are that the difference between the bridge as we envisioned it originally and the end product are not that far. We'll probably end up with something very close to what we have originally imagined. And that's because the components are very less subject to change. The gravity, the materials, the road underneath, everything is going to remain as is. Agile, on the other hand, is more efficient when we are discovering what we're building, or it's highly subjective to change, or it can be sliced into multiple usable increments. So let's take an example in the COVID situation that we're in. SafeWA is an app that was created to be able to allow people to check into multiple places and to allow tracking. And so I remember the very first version that came out, there was one problem, is that you had to enter the name of your husband or your wife every single time you check in. That would take a lot of time. And then the first product update came along, and I remember vividly that you could now enter the name of your wife and remember that person as someone who always follows you in those places. Therefore, you wouldn't have to re-enter the name every single time. So that was very convenient. And you can see how it came as a product update. So the first version of the app didn't have that, but then the first product update with the second sprint brought that additional functionality. So because I don't know who you are and what exact projects you are trying to drive, I'm going to ask you a question. So think about all your current projects, and if any of them is highly subject to change and can be delivered incrementally, then I would like you to take this project as something that we keep in mind for the rest of this presentation, because it will help us connect the dots. So the first thing we're going to need to do is to learn how to build a backlog. So first, the backlog is really about listing all the outcomes that you want. In our case here, we're going to be going back to the example of the WA Safe app. And we're going to have the first outcome being a pretty big one, and it's what we call the MVP, the minimum viable product. So that's really the very basic first release that we want. But then after that, we have other things that we want to build, but most likely they don't fit in our timelines. Three examples that we have here is the ability to add your partner's name in the app so that you can save it, to be informed immediately if you need COVID testing, or if you want users to be able to switch languages. So these are three features that we wanted that were in our backlog but didn't make the MVP. So that's what we call post-launch features. So you want to put them in your backlog as well. And then as we release the MVP, we're collecting feedback from the user. So for example, we realized that it's taking a long time to download, so we would like to make it less than 20 seconds, or be able to fix a couple of bugs, for example. When you've done that, then you move to the value rating. So I took out the MVP because that would be a really big delivery, focusing on smaller chunks now. So you look at these 5 product backlog items, and you're going to give them a value. It doesn't have to be scientific at this point in time. It's more about, like a gut feeling, 1 through 10 of how valuable that particular addition is. And then you just enter that number. And then you look at the cost. So the cost is like the effort or the money that it will take in order to deliver this. You can use what we call t-shirt size, small, medium, or large, or you can use more elaborate techniques that we can talk about later. And when we have that, what you really want is the maximum amount of value for the minimum cost at the top of your backlog, because that's what you want to release first. The next question is, what is slicing? So when a backlog item is too big to deliver soon, but we could take a slice of it and deliver the rest later, it's called slicing. So it's a nice technique. Here's an example where we want to be able to switch languages. That's a 3 in value, but that's a cost of that's a medium cost. That's what our team is telling us. It's going to take a while. However, if you really look at it, you realize that what you really want is Bahasa Indonesia first and foremost, and the rest can wait a little bit. So then you're going to ask just for that one language, and you're going to give it a value of 1 with a cost that is small. And you're going to prioritize that up in your backlog so it gets delivered first. And later on, we'll move into look at Mandarin and other languages in a later stage. That's what is called slicing. So there, just like that, we've learned the first Agile tool, which is the backlog. So the backlog is a list of deliverables that should be implemented. It's a decision-making artifact that helps you estimate, refine, prioritize everything that you want to complete. Now we're looking at this framework in front of me. It's called Scrum. It's one of the different Agile methods. There's also Kanban. And the first thing that we've talked about now is how to create a backlog on the far left. But there's many other things that we're going to talk about today. We've also talked about one of the 3 key roles in Agile, and is the product owner, the person who owns the backlog content, prioritization, and communication to stakeholders. So the product owner, as we said, could be you, or it could be someone else. Usually it's someone who is an expert in the field, who is able to quickly advise on what should be the most important focus for the team, so that we can prioritize our backlog and guide the team accordingly. So the other thing is that we've talked about those chunks of deliverables, what we call sprint. It could be 2 weeks, it could be 4 weeks. Right now we're going to assume that it's 2 weeks. So the question I have for you is, what is the backlog item that you think your team could deliver in 2 weeks? And we're going to stop there. We're going to move on to the next one after.